Forward Obsessed. I'm your host, Pete Sena, and I'm really, really excited to have our guest, Al Bhatt, here to kick off our first episode on a really, really pressing topic, which is what is the future of education? So, Al, welcome to the show. For those of you that don't know, Al is kind of like a wizard. He's got like a million years of experience, and he's going to talk to that in just a second. But so thanks again for coming on. I really, really appreciate it. Al's an expert in organizational development, human development, and he does what really caught my eye was when I first met him. He talked about this idea of doing Trojan horse work inside companies. So I guess Al, just so I'm not butchering your introduction, can you just tell the audience a little bit about who you are and what the hell do you mean by Trojan horse development?
Sure. Yeah. And first off, thank you for the invitation to be here. Apologies for leaving my wizard hat at home. Wouldn't fit in the car. Um, yeah. So the short version is, the last 30 years, I've worked with organizations on what we call breakthrough, doing things that have never been done before in the organization or in the industry. About 53, not about 50, exactly 53 Fortune 100s. Ton of startups, a lot of social ventures, social entrepreneurs, that kind of thing. Um, and then about 15 years ago, we launched a master's program, a Master of Arts in Organizational Leadership, grounded in the premise that leadership is an art form, unique self-expression, does not belong in business school, does not belong in social psychology, but belongs in the humanities. It took us 5 years to get a university to accept that proposition. We eventually did. And so for the last 15 years, we've been running that program as well. So that's the short version of what I do. Trojan horse work. It is my experience that clients and human beings in general um, don't ask for what they truly need because they don't even know they need it yet.
Sure, it's like the Henry Ford analogy.
Yeah, exactly.
Faster horses versus the no car.
Yeah. Spot on. Although my reference points go a little different direction on it. There was so I was born in India, and there's we have more gods than you can count, and more saints and more but one that looms large in my family for my grandfather and some other folks is a gentleman by the name of Sai Baba of Shirdi, 1800s fakir, a minister to poor folks. And one of the things he said that always it's been kind of a hallmark for me that ties into this Trojan horse piece. He said, I give people what they need so that they'll be ready to need what it is I truly have to give.
Interesting.
So my experience is that so we take it out of that kind of esoteric, a realm of some spiritual teacher in the 1800s and bring it back to, corporate America, late 20th century.
We can teach the audience how to meditate if you want. Maybe we can just get right into it. No, I'm just kidding.
Yeah, I was gonna start unpacking that into the some other distinctions I know you want to talk about. So we'll come back. We'll come back to teaching meditation. Can't be done. Short answer. My experience is that clients, students, but clients. Let's start with there, are always asking for what the pain is they know how to name, but what's underneath it they don't have yet the ability to see. And I'm not talking about like root cause kind of thing. I'm talking about that they have things going on in a different domain of the system. Okay. And so Trojan horse work is, I will provide you with what you've hired me to provide you. But the work I'm actually doing is to, through providing that, get you ready for the work you really need to do to be who you say you want to be.
That's, I think, a fantastic segue. So you're the founder of You Have Next, which I know about now, but obviously I'd love for you to talk a little bit about what is You Have Next, and then and essentially getting to the really root, which is let's talk about future. What does future mean to you, and why do you believe that the current state of education is broken?
Sure.
Which I think is in itself a provocative discussion that's going to make for lots of comments, right?
Yeah. So again, as short as I can make it, You Have Next is it's an institute of education that's committed to what education, not what it needs to look like, what it's always been, but has been limited in its application and practice.
How do you mean?
Okay, yeah. So most of what goes on, all of what goes on in schools, universities, is not education.
Okay.
It's training. Okay, it's a form of training. And listen, it is. So the question of what's broken with education, with traditional schools, nothing. There's absolutely nothing broken. There's nothing broken. There's nothing broken. Okay, this glass right here that these folks have kindly filled up with water. Now, if I poured boiling hot water into this, and then I picked up the glass, and I burned my fingers, and I started screaming about how this glass was defective, would that make any sense?
No.
No. The glass wasn't designed for that. It was designed for this. Works perfectly for that. There's nothing wrong with the school systems. They work exactly what they do exactly what they were designed to do.
Which is what?
Create predictable, reliable outcomes in a narrow set of disciplines.
You covered that a little bit on your TED Talk.
Yeah.
Recently, which I thought was really interesting. You talked about that. Was it the number 8, inspected by number 8?
Yeah, listen. Yeah, so that story is. Thanks for bringing that up. I mean, the reference point is if you buy a pair of jeans or a piece of clothing, there's always a little tag in the pocket. It says inspected by number 40, inspected by number 8, and what that means is that somebody inspected those pair of jeans. Yeah, they made sure that it met the specs.
It's a time a guarantee on the box.
Yeah, and if you bought that pair of jeans at Old Navy, it meets their set of specs. And if you bought them for $500 at some boutique, it meets their set of specs, but it meets predefined specs.
Mm.
That's all that a diploma is, folks. A diploma is your inspected by number 8 sticker. When you get a undergrad degree in finance from Yale University down the road, that's an inspected by number 8 sticker. It means that your product has been found to meet the specifications for an entry-level pair of jeans or an entry-level finance person in the world.
Interesting.
That's all that thing is.
That's really helpful. I see myself as a student of life now, and I consume every bit of information that I can to try to turn it into perspective or knowledge. But by typical definitions, I think most of my past professors or teachers would say that I was a really bad student.
Yeah.
Right? Very nonlinear. So
Yeah.
one thing that I read, sort of as a novice to education in general, I've been seeing a lot of headlines lately, New York Times pieces, etc., Atlantic, talking about how education's broken. So
Sure.
I'd love for you to you're saying that you don't believe education's
I
broken.
don't think it's broken at all. I think there's something missing. That's a fundamentally different condition than something's broken.
Interesting.
So this glass isn't broken, but if I want to use it for hot beverages, something's missing. Insulation.
Right.
All right. So every attempt I make to try to fix this glass to be able to hold hot water is futile and wasteful.
Right. Don't treat the flower, treat the system around it.
Yeah, and it makes wrong something that isn't wrong.
Interesting.
Right? So no, I don't think education is broken. I think there's something missing. I think the world that it was designed for doesn't exist anymore.
Well, what do you believe is missing? If you had to sort of sum it up like the glass.
Yeah. So a quick entry point to answer that question. You realize that you and I and everybody listening, you've never been hired for a job and you never will.
Okay.
What gets hired is an abstraction of you. When you hire in your company somebody, you don't hire. Now your company may be a little different. You're a smaller firm and very broad in your thinking, but in general, a small, a mid-size.
We're always hiring, by the way.
Yeah. Beautiful space. Go apply. An agency or a large agency or any company, you're never hiring a person. You're hiring an abstraction of a person. You're hiring those knowledge, skills, and abilities that make them an appropriate resource for the machine role that you have for them to fill.
Interesting.
They skateboard. That's nice. That's cool. We don't care. They, I don't know, like French New Wave cinema. Cool. We can talk about that over lunch, but we don't care for the job. Right? And so it's a factory system all the way through. Right? Listen, the earliest schools were attached to factories. Citizens didn't create schools, government didn't create schools, church didn't create schools. Early industrialists in England created what we now know as schools.
Right.
As people were coming in off the fields, they had to teach them the basics that allowed them to work on a factory floor. Reading, writing, arithmetic, basic computational skills, basic literacy skills. And they looked like a little factory. You had 3 rooms. They came in and they weeded out the folks who, could do basic computational, went to the second room. You got basic literacy. If you made it past that, you went to a third room and you learned how to tighten a bolt or whatever basic skill there was, and you went to the factory and you were on that assembly line.
Interesting.
That's exactly what work in school look like now. I'm looking for an entry-level marketer. It has to have skills of A, B, and C.
Check the box.
I talk about it exactly the way I talk about a machine. I need a camera that can record 4K video, is under $3,000, et cetera, et cetera. That's
It's a
no
spec
different.
sheet. Yeah.
Yeah, that's no different. Well, that's what a job description is. It's a spec sheet,
Right.
and it matches a resume, which is also a spec sheet. And when the two match, you say, okay, that's the person who gets hired.
So tell me something. So you've obviously had an amazing career. We were talking before getting on the show, and just some of the titan tech companies. I don't know how many you can talk about, but I know many of them that you've helped over the years.
Sure.
Many of which are on our phones that we open daily, but I'm not going to say which ones.
Facebook was a client for 7 years. That's what he's talking about.
You said it, I didn't say it. So talk to me about why you have next. Well, if education is doing the job it was designed to do,
Yeah.
why do you believe that? Like, why you have next?
Yeah. Well, so listen, I don't know. Carburetors were designed to do something that works really well, but once fuel injection came around, who needed a carburetor anymore for their car?
Right.
Right.
Who needs an engine anymore? Right.
Who needs that? Well, now, right? Who needs a combustion engine anymore?
Right.
So it's not that they're broken. It's that the world has moved to a place where we no longer need, and increasingly we need less and less, folks who can fulfill machine roles.
Interesting.
Right? Content, the purpose of a school is to create control, predictability, reliability relative to expertise in some content area. And so if I get an entry-level finance person from Yale or from University of New Haven down the road, wherever it is, the expectation is that they have content expertise at a level where they'll be control, predictability, reliability in the behaviors and outcomes related to what an entry-level finance person has to do. Right? That's the nature of it. But now, increasingly, technology does content-related work.
Right.
Right. Now, this is all about, if folks were watching, and for you, I'm sure, this, 28 years ago when I opened my first consulting firm, this stuff was weird. Everybody gets this now. Right? Everybody gets this.
Known commodities.
Yeah, everybody gets all this, right? This isn't a surprise to anybody. But if you look at how we're reacting to what everybody gets, is we're trying to do what you're saying. We're trying to fix.
Interesting.
We're trying to improve. You can't fix. So why you've next? Right. Long way to get to your question. We're taking everything we've learned from 30 years on consulting and education. I've also been teaching in traditional universities, non-traditional programs in traditional universities. Chicago Theological Seminary, University of New Haven, and then the Graduate Institute, a small independent university. We're trying to take everything we've learned from the 30 years of consulting work and the 20-ish years of teaching, and from the ground up create an experience that provides what's missing. So here's what's missing: human development.
Interesting.
Okay. Versus development of that abstraction of human beings that's about knowledge, skills, and abilities.
So essentially, soft skills.
It's fascinating. Every research study you look at from corporate America, they tell you what we're looking for is teamwork, collaboration, etc. And yet we still call it soft skills.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
It's not soft skills.
Agreed.
They're concrete skills. They're not. And the other thing is they're not skills.
Right. Obviously poking you.
Yeah, they're not skills. They're states of being. So this is the domain thing. We get back to the original question you asked about Trojan horse. People hire us to do what I would call psychological work, i.e., knowledge, skills, behaviors, attitudes, perceptions. Okay, where the work is ontological work.
Right.
Not states of doing, but states of being.
But you have to assess how to categorize things and what it means to categorize prior to being able to actually do an ontology or something, right?
Yes, and what if, Pete, that we could proceed in human systems absent categorizations?
Right.
That what if the basis of an ontological conversation in a human system was just open space,
right,
absent category?
Which is essentially how a brain or a neural network is designed to function.
That's right. That's right. So why you have next and what you have next in terms of environment, it proceeds not from what traditional education proceeds from, which is content, expertise, and curriculum. It proceeds first and foremost from space.
Right. So essentially what you're doing is you're not teaching people how to think. You're essentially creating the conditions that will allow them to experience something.
Yes.
And I'm not a paid spokesperson.
Yeah, no, I'm smiling because in the handful of conversations we've had, I continue to marvel at how quickly you get stuff and are able to articulate it back in a way that it normally takes me 30 hours of conversation before what you just said kind of emerges.
Okay. Well,
But
we
yeah,
usually have a
spot
whole lot
on.
of bourbon. Bourbon makes it
Bourbon
easier,
makes
right?
bourbon makes everything better. Absolutely.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's not part of the school though.
It's BYOB.
Yeah, I hope it's right. Um, I lost the thread of thought. I mean,
No, it's all
in my
good.
admiration for you, I've lost
No,
my
I
thread of
appreciate
thought.
it. I think what we were sort of headed towards is just the premise as to why you have Next in the first place, and essentially what you're creating. So it sounds to me like what Trojan horse thinking is, what disruptive thinking is that you've have discussed in general is just this idea of looking at something differently. And what better way to look at it than just when I use a word like future, right? Before we define what the future of education is, how do you define the future? Because I think what you were saying the other day to me, I'd love for the viewers to hear, because just even the way you think about future, I think is so fundamentally different than what normally I hear people say. Or if I opened up an Oxford dictionary, what it would say. So what's
Cool.
future to you, Al?
So, um, absent the visual, I'll try to kind of just generate this in language. Think about two types of future and two types of past. Okay, so I want you to think about time and two types of time.
Sure.
So I think about time, the way we conceive it is a linear phenomena. There's stuff that happened before, stuff that happens after.
Gotta call the Greeks up for the Chronos, right?
Really smart guy. Chronos and Kairos. This is exactly the reference point, right? So Chronos is the god of linear time.
Mm-hmm.
Something's happened, something will happen.
Right.
When people are talking about future and they're engaging with future, they're locked into Chronos thinking. What's going to happen out there in linear time? Okay, very relevant. But Kairos is also the Greek god of time,
Right.
but the god of now. Okay,
Right.
so now I want you to imagine visually, we've got this linear time, past, present, future, that proceeds sequentially,
Mm-hmm.
causally, etc. Right?
Right.
And then imagine another axis that is also time, type 2 time.
Sure.
Okay, and it's a depth of time.
Right.
And in that time, there's also past and future.
Yep.
Type 2 past, type 2 future.
Right.
Okay, that is non-physical time.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And so let me actually step back, and this will make it easier to get to one of our root distinctions, which is about the nature of reality. Okay, so reality, we all kind of,
I'm not going to do that. What is reality?
What is reality?
We're not going there.
We're
Right?
not going
This
there.
could take a while.
This could take a while. And yet I'm going to answer what is reality.
course you
Not,
will.
but not in
I'm
the,
not expecting nothing less from you.
yeah. I'm not going to answer what is reality, but I want to distinguish reality though. So consider that there are at least two classes of reality. Okay. There's something we could call physical reality. And physical reality is, I don't know if I think I can drop without breaking it, but if I had a pen, I dropped it, hits the table, right? Or if it misses the table, it hits the ground, right? It's a phenomenon of what we call gravity. It's a manifestation of physical reality. It's a reality that exists before there's any language for it.
Right.
Before we have the language of gravity, before we have the mathematics, the language of mathematics that explains the phenomena, that exists. Right? It's a physical reality. Mm-hmm. There's a second class of reality called non-physical reality. Non-physical reality is reality that exists as a consequence of language. Right. So biology studies physical reality. What they study and call cells exist prior to the language. Right. Psychology, my discipline, studies non-physical reality. There's no such thing as ego. Ego is a language construct that accurately, but it accurately represents the experience, and so it's real. Right. But it's a non-physical reality. Sociology studies non-physical reality. Theology studies non-physical reality. Psychology studies non-physical reality, right? So non-physical reality is constructed solely in language. Right. When you and I walk about our daily lives, right, we leave here, we get into that big hunk of metal and rubber and whatever else, right? We don't care about the physical reality of that object. We care about the non-physical aspects. I travel a ton. I care about safety, comfort, and a killer stereo system. What I mean by those three things is only in language. It's my experience. Right. It's a non-physical reality.
Right. So essentially what I'm hearing you say is when your vision is achieved with You Have Next, you will essentially create a community of people that have the ability to exist and succeed despite not understanding all of the elements of the rule book.
Yeah, so let's go back to time now, right? So yes, and let's go back to time.
The physical time.
So both, right? So we got type 1 time,
Right,
which
excellent.
is physical reality time.
Hmm.
Type 2 time, non-physical reality time.
Sure.
Non-physical reality time, there's a past and a future.
Okay.
And it's contingent on how I speak.
Right.
And so when I speak in the now, I can speak uh, um, assertively, meaning it's a truth that has evidence from the temporal past. So I can say it's 72 degrees outside.
Right.
Okay? I'm speaking assertively. The implication is I can provide data from the past, 2 minutes in the past or whatever in the
Right.
past, that backs up that truth.
Right.
I can also speak declaratively
Right.
in the now.
But if you said it's happy outside, a traditional educational system would not equip us with the ability to solve for happy in that construct.
Worse, they would shut you down as nonsense.
Right.
They would say you don't understand the nature of the problem.
Right.
Right?
Based on the linear construct that they're providing.
Yeah.
That's just super interesting.
Now think about it in the context of what you guys do, innovation.
Yeah.
Right? Innovation exists in non-physical reality. It exists in the now, in my willingness to engage in speech acts that are declarative.
Right.
I say we're going to build a university that proceeds not from content and curriculum, but space for human emergence.
Right.
There's no evidence in the past for that. I say it, and so it's future, but it's non-physical future. And now I go to work in creating it as physical future.
Right.
But people try to create future by planning.
Right.
Or by visioning in the corporate sense.
Which essentially is the reason why you have to be the Trojan horse in these organizations.
That's right.
Is because if you operate under the same set of principles or constructs that they operate under, you're not going to help them reach their end goal.
That's right.
Right.
The future that they know how to ask for is a continuation of the past, but better.
Right.
Most visions in corporations are continuations of the past, but better. They're not visions. It's why they can't innovate.
Right. Because it's incremental and evolutionary as opposed to.
It's a linear time construct. They're not tapping into what's required to, and we're we're shortcutting this conversation a lot.
Yeah, of course.
But conceptually, this kind of gets at it. Is they're not tapping into what's required to generate actual future, new future.
Awesome. So, what do you believe some of the more progressive, let's call them, let's say universities, for lack of a better definition, because I'm a novice in this. I'm sure people listening are going to be much more adept at this than I am. But when you think about just the current premise of what an organization or university is at the high level, what do you believe the progressive universities are adding or incorporating into their educational curriculums or experiences that ultimately will help solve for the inspected by number 8 thing in the future?
Well, I think, so just no particular order, but some of the trends you're seeing there I think are really helpful. Getting rid of teachers as subject matter experts and replacing, in PhD programs, we actually tend to do this well, right? The professor, the instructor is not there to give you, their wisdom. They're there as provocateurs, instigators, and challengers of what you're generating originally.
So no longer the stage on the stage model.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. So that's part of what's happening. The micro examples or micro manifestations, peer-based learning. Learning is learning, actual learning, not repeating what's been said.
Right.
Okay. We have a mistaken notion of what thinking is in schools and in society in general. Everything that passes for thinking in schools is not thinking; it's thunking. That's a past tense of thinking. It's the retrieval of previously thought thoughts.
Thunking with Albot. I like it.
Yeah, well, that's what it is. You're retrieving. That's what gets rewarded. Can you retrieve a thought that somebody else previously thought? If you do, you get an A.
Right.
Actual thinking is sloppy. It's messy. It's like an artist working at the thing. There's no blueprint for it.
I love that you say that. I mean, I'm gonna call my mom and say, "Mom, this is my room was always messy when I was a kid." Absolutely no. We always say, excuse me, that design is messy.
Yeah.
And it's that process. It looks more like a crime scene experience than it does.
That's right. And then surprises emerge.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So part of what helps that messiness and what leverages that messiness is peer-based learning. Learning is communal. So it's another trend you see in schools that from elementary schools, kindergartens on up to universities is peer-based learning, learning teams. I think that's a really positive trend. I think leveraging, again, simple is, leveraging the technology because that's where content is available to the individual.
So it sounds to me, if I had to sort of summarize that based on those key things, what I'm seeing is it's moving from knowledge or information being passed from the teacher to the student to now the shift in perspective is putting the student in the driver's seat so that the teacher ends up becoming more of a coach and a collaborator than they do a sort of programmer of information, if you will.
That's right. That's exactly right. We one way to hold this, Pete, is that what we do in traditional schools is we manufacture
Right.
experts of a certain level.
I want to poke at that for a second, which is this idea of what the hell do Jimi Hendrix and Eric Clapton have to do with innovation as it pertains to the topic that I promised you I'd ask about, which is A, I had no idea that Jimi Hendrix played the guitar backwards. So that to me just made me feel like all my knowledge of classic rock is moot compared to yours. So thank you for that once again. Make me feel stupid. Appreciate that. But you talked about this notion of like science, art, and craft.
Sure.
So just start by telling me, like, Eric Clapton, Jimi Hendrix, how did those two legendary musicians and entertainers traverse into your thinking as it pertains to future and you of next and education?
Yeah, thank you. Well, listen, in anything we can look at, right, in any discipline, anything we can engage in, there's a science to it, there's a craft to it, there's an art to it. Okay. The science of it is what's knowable. It's that I can understand. And so playing guitar, there's a bunch that I can understand about the guitar. I can understand how the strings are strung. I can understand scales. I can understand chords. I can understand how a hollow body versus a solid body sounds different. Electric, acoustic. And there's a whole bunch I can understand about guitar. That's really useful. If I take traditional guitar lessons, I'm learning those things. It can be very useful.
Absolutely.
Right? So that's the science of guitar. The art is my unique voice. My saying what only there is for me to say.
Right.
So Hendrix picks up the guitar as a kid, has so little connection with the science. He's left-handed. He only has access to a right-handed guitar, so he's holding it the way he knows how to hold it. Turns out it's upside down and backwards. He has no clue.
Interesting.
Right? But he's expressing on it. You give any kid, you give a 4-year-old a guitar, they're going to make art. They're not going to play the guitar right, but they're going to express. Human beings, by their nature, express. It's innate in us. No matter how much we try to squash it in schools, which we do, and in home, which we do.
So you give a guitar right now to a 40-year-old that's walking by.
Yeah, they may bang on it, but they're going to express something.
How about a 40-year-old?
A 40?
What's the difference between a 4-year-old and a 40-year-old?
Oh, a 40-year-old's going to say, I don't know how to play that. 9 times out of 10, they're going to say, I don't know how to play that. Yeah?
So we've essentially taught them how not to learn.
Yeah, just pause on that, how tragic that is.
Yeah.
The instant reaction, 9 out of 10, I don't know how to play that. As if the science were the only part that mattered.
Interesting.
So
we're essentially, what I'm hearing from my abstraction of that is society and the current design of the systems of education, for me, media, society, all this stuff, we are essentially programmed to not be creative.
Yeah, absolutely. Listen, I tell this story a lot. I don't do a lot of consulting anymore, but for the last decade of my practice, I could summarize 95% of the calls I got down to one sentence. Nobody actually said this directly, but this is what the call was. Hey, we really need to get better at innovation. You got a process for that?
Yep.
Completely missing.
Yeah.
The insanity of what they're asking.
They want a PowerPoint.
They want the science.
They want to check the box.
Innovation is not science.
Absolutely.
You got to create the conditions in which people can express.
So we covered
it's
science
not a formula.
And craft.
Oh, science and art. Yeah.
Science and art.
Art. Yeah.
Not
So
craft yet.
So craft. Right. So the Clapton example, right? If you look at any now, have you seen Clapton play?
Not live. No.
Okay. I've had the opportunity to see him a bunch of times
You're a wizard,
in a bunch of different genres. I'm sorry.
You travel through time like a wizard.
Yeah. That's right.
Just about the gray hair.
Yeah. That's right. So you're surprised at how old I am. So.
I was.
Yeah. But I've had the pleasure of seeing Clapton a bunch of times through different phases and in different genres. Clapton, for me, is an example of a craftsman or a craftsperson. So what craft is about, so if science is what's understandable about a thing, right?
Mm-hmm.
To overly simplify it, but what's understandable about it,
Sure.
right? Rich, powerful, valuable. And if art is my unique expression in that context, whether it's guitar or finance, it's my unique expression. It's what I uniquely can see if I'm willing to give it voice, right?
Right.
Craft is cultivated only over time, and it's about my kinesthetic relationship to the thing.
So it's embedded cognition.
Yeah, yeah, you're a smart guy. That's exactly it.
Well, I kind of do this for a living.
Yeah, I know. It's,
Contrary to popular video.
yeah, yeah, yeah. No, yeah, that's exactly it, right? It's part of my body. And so somebody who's got deep craft with the guitar, they pick it up, and while they're talking, they're not even intending to play. They're just kind of
Right.
they're just noodling. They just got it's an extension. It's another limb.
Right.
Clapton is a master craftsman. That man can make anything happen with that guitar. It is stunning in any genre.
But he's not an artist.
He's not. If you look at everything that people associate with him as really like profound work, he wasn't the creative force behind it.
Interesting.
Right? It's somebody else. Ginger Baker in Cream. What's his name? Mason in Derek and the Dominoes. Right? But
Sure.
amazing craftsman throughout the whole thing.
See, that's interesting. Is I want to get a little bit into this notion of organizational development because I think it's a key concept. So I'll come back to that.
Yeah, yeah.
Please continue.
Just one quick thing, John. I'm sorry to interrupt you. One quick thing that just to round out that archive science. Science requires discipline. You must sit and study.
Right.
Art requires courage. You must be willing to pick up the thing with no understanding and just express.
Right.
Craft requires practice. A practice. Like we talk about meditation, so now I want to come back to meditation. That's why I want to come back to meditation. Can't teach you to meditate. Just shut up and meditate.
Right.
I don't care what you do. 10 minutes a day for 5 years, you're golden. Right?
Yep.
You don't need any classes. You don't need it. It's a practice. It's like brushing your teeth. You're not done.
Take it from me. I didn't start when I was 4 like you.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. So that's what I want to say. Is, each domain requires a different engagement. Right. Traditional education, we are stuck in one domain. Understand it and be disciplined. The other domains are squashed.
Interesting. So one of the things that we do a lot with our clients is teach. And now I'm going to rethink my entire reality thanks to this conversation. I appreciate you for that. So goodbye sleep for the next 6 months. We get hired to essentially infuse the principles and practices around how to do design thinking in a big way, and it comes under a lot of different words and terms. And essentially, you are designing a lot of these thinking frameworks, and I'm going to come back to that in a second. But while on the topic of music, I know music's a big passion of yours, just artistically, and I'm a huge just fan and student of music. I don't play instruments, but I just love the music making process. I often say to people that, in another life, I am or was a producer, right? And one of the things that you mentioned about Clapton is, I was recently talking to one of our teammates about this notion of like Jay-Z specifically, looking at Jay-Z, Rick Rubin, and Guru, right? So this idea of the producer, the performer, the engineer, that sort of triad, right? Any one of them individually is, has a ton of skill, has many elements in this art, craft, and science, right? But it's not until you pull that triad together that you're able to sort of see that explosion, right? And that's sort of me starting to poke at this idea from a team perspective, right? What I've seen is some of the greatest innovators, despite the Hugheses and the Musks and the Jobs of our consciousness and what we're aware of in the history, essentially they never did it alone, right? There was always the person in the back. So talk to me about how can the system of education be modified to produce better conditions for teams? So talk to me about what makes a great team, and then also how right now education systems are not spitting out great teams, which is something I get calls a lot from, all the time. I was just talking to one of my CMO friends and colleagues and client, and he said, I'm hiring these amazing, MBAs come right out of Wharton. Yeah. He's like, and they just don't work well together. He's like, it must just be the millennials. I'm like, whoa, it's not just that. So start poking at that. So help me understand teams, education, and why would there such a fundamental disconnection of that? Yeah. I'd love for the audience to understand that.
Well, if you think about, so, my cell phone here. So there are, X number of team members in this machine. Okay. Mm-hmm. There's there's a screen, there's a process, a graphics interface, there's a battery, right? Mm-hmm. And so if you think about that as a team, each has a discrete set of skills that it's responsible for. each has had a discrete set of transactions it's responsible for, and each has a discrete set of transactions it executes with other members,
Sure.
right? That's exactly how we design work. But then expect teamwork.
Right.
Okay?
So
It's a design issue.
We're designing it.
It's a design issue. We've designed everything as a machine. If you ask me for like the simple bottom line of everything we've ever done and currently do with you up next, I think, is just the acknowledgement of the fact that the machine model of life is insufficient for human expression, and we're at a point in history where we have the luxury of letting go of that, right? And so teamwork for me is actually a simple matter. It's about human relationship. Do you and your wife and your kids have to do team building exercises?
I don't have kids, but
Well, okay.
My wife and I've taken her through a few frameworks.
Through frameworks,
Because sometimes, no, we don't have to do team building exercises.
Yeah. No, that doesn't mean problems don't come up. It doesn't mean conflicts don't come up. But they get addressed in the context of relationship, not in the context of transactions.
Right.
And so you can't put people together in a transactional framework and then expect relational outcomes. It's madness. Right? So that's the issue.
Unless we're trying to create a factory that creates a perfect cap for the toothpaste.
Yeah. In which case you're going to get perfect transactions.
And Taylorism would work.
Yeah.
Sure.
But corporate folks keep asking for it's like the innovation thing. We need our people to get along better and go above and beyond for each other and teamwork and blah blah blah.
Right. But
and
you say
you got a formula for that?
But you say in your TED talk, which I love by the way,
Yeah.
you talk a lot about this idea that managers by design are designed to produce predictable, reliable outcomes, right?
Every single job you can look at that I've looked at on the planet, the design of it is control, predictability, reliability.
Right.
A doctor's job is not health. A doctor's job is control, predictability, reliability relative to health outcomes.
Within a variance, I'd imagine.
Well, that's what I'm saying. Yeah. So like you're a surgeon that performs surgery type X. That surgery has a 92% success rate, plus or minus 1%.
Right.
If 7 of my patients die on the table out of 100, I'm fine.
Yeah.
Now, as a doctor, each individual doctor wants 100%, but the design of the system, 7 out of 100 die, you're fine. Teachers, the job is control, predictability, reliability relative to health outcomes. Our school district has an average graduation rate of 92%, plus or minus 3%, give a variation year to year. This year's graduation rate is 91%. That principal and that superintendent are fine. Good job. Attaboy.
So some would argue that, for every Steve Jobs that gets created or that happens, there's millions of people that are required to bring those visions to life.
Yeah.
Right? My question for you is, if we were able to modify the design of the education system in general, and we had all these sort of free and radical thinkers, dare I say, existing, wouldn't we essentially have complete chaos by not having any systems in the machine?
It's a great, insightful question, Pete. You next is a Trojan horse too.
So it's a Trojan within a Trojan.
Yeah.
Because I'm imagining like, if my entire team, and not my team in terms of my company, but let's just say I'm on a team in an organization. If my entire team is a series of, what I would define as a creative rebel, or some of my friends would define as a creative rebel. What essentially is if you have a team of people acting and behaving that way outside of systems and machines and such, how do they ultimately play well?
So the other part of this formula, and the part that's a Trojan horse on the U of Next, because there's only so much appetite folks have for these kind of conversations, despite where we are in the world. And I'll say this transparently as I can, and then try to back into a deeper conversation about it. I would love to see a century where we have no more Steve Jobs. I would love to see a century where we have no more great men with great ideas doing great things.
Or women.
Or women, yeah. But it's been men, traditionally, not because they're the only ones capable, but that's what we,
That's a marketing problem also, though.
Yeah.
But we'll get back to that.
Yeah.
And why do you say that?
Yeah, because my experience. Okay, I'll explain it through talking about our leadership program, the 2 year leadership program, and we've had people from IBM, executives from IBM, Johnson and Johnson, it companies come through it as well as social entrepreneurs, and invariably they have to do a breakthrough project, right? So at the end of the 2 years, they have to do this big presentation. They have up to 6 hours to do it.
And my breakthrough, just for the audience, is breakthrough your version of a capstone, essentially?
Yes, but breakthrough. I'm going to talk about the criteria for breakthrough. But
Great.
yeah, it's a capstone,
Perfect.
but it has very specific criteria. Invariably, what they talk about in their presentation, they'll spend if they take 6 hours, they'll spend 45 minutes talking about this insane thing they did in the world, increased revenue 600% or some crazy thing, right? And then they'll spend 5.5 hours talking about okay, but let me tell you about what really happened these 2 years. The relationship I have with my daughter now, holy crap, right? The relationship I have with the people I work with, holy crap. Okay? Here are the 4 criteria for breakthrough. In order to graduate from our program, you have to take on a breakthrough, and the breakthrough has 4 elements to it. One, it has to be something that from your current reality is impossible. Not tough, not a stretch goal, impossible. Okay? But it furthers your mission for yourself or your company in some way. But it's impossible. Okay? 2, it is bigger than your own self-interest. It includes your self-interest, but it is inherently bigger than your self-interest.
Awesome.
3, if you were to achieve it, if it were to manifest, it would outlive you. By nature of how it manifests, it doesn't require you.
Fantastic.
And then 4, it makes your heart sing. Not you like it, not you're passionate about it, but you can't talk about it without getting a little verklempt, as they say,
Okay.
right? So my point in saying this is what we've learned just through practice, not through theory, is that human beings that are out for something big that's outside of their self-interest take care of so many of the problems we try to take care of through other means in our organizations and our society versus people who are out for my vision.
Right.
So the
essentially,
Steve Jobs model of leadership.
Right. So I was going to say, you beat me to my next question, so damn you. There's 2 perceptive people here, right? And I'm not one of them. It's the camera person. But so you would like to see a century without an Elon Musk or a Steve Jobs?
Because of what you said, it's not Elon Musk.
Right.
There's 100 people
It's the army
times 100 underneath him.
Right.
And Elon nothing. That's not a knock on, right?
Yeah.
But the work that there is for us to do, we just don't need big men with big ideas, big women with big ideas. Right. We need out here. You walk out this door, and take a right, and walk down a few blocks.
Yep.
I want those 1,000 people living in that neighborhood who don't have access, but who have so much creative juice.
Right. To unlock their unleash their potential.
Yeah. Because when you look at what's happening, people are doing it.
Right.
They just don't have the spotlight and shouldn't need the spotlight.
So what I'm hearing you say there, I talk a lot about this notion on some of the other things we've done recently about the one thing I think missing from organizations is not design or design thinking, which lots of smart consultants would say is a big thing missing, and they'd be right. I think it's curiosity. And I think curiosity aligns and attached to possibility. So what I'm hearing from you is those, people that are in a situation where they don't see possibility. They don't have that hope. So for them, they turn to something that they understand, what's in their reality, right? Because they don't have the tools to essentially do that breakthrough work.
Yeah.
So I guess the question is part of the vision of you of Next to be able to open source some of these tools, these thinking frameworks that then give everybody the ability to do a breakthrough. Is that sort of in the vision?
The work is actually already open source. There are half a dozen very successful consulting firms that use our stuff in the background. There's a handful of companies that use it in the background. There's some folks who've used it to get themselves famous, which is irksome only because it corrupts the conversation. When words get used too much in sound bites, they start to lose their meaning because language is created, reality is created in language.
That's the way with design these days.
Yeah. Design thinking, perfect example. Design thinking, it's corrupted.
Yeah.
This really valuable piece of human work is corrupted into this soundbite. So, but back to your question, a lot of it's, all of it's open sourced already. The idea is to get it into the hands of. So I've had a practice, and I'm talking about a lot, but I've had a practice of my whole career of at least a third of my time pro bono. The last 7 years, it's been 70% of my time I do pro bono.
Wow.
You next, the idea is to all those communities we were serving there to try to get as close to 100 as we can,
It's amazing.
and to open source it to folks who never have access to these conversations. Um, but to go back to the previous point, who are out for something bigger than themselves.
Right.
It's a paradox. I mean, we get it intellectually, but it's got to be gotten kinesthetically, embodied. Being out for something bigger than yourself is liberating. It's not burdening.
Right.
It's liberating.
It's abundance thinking versus scarcity.
Yeah, it's
right.
completely liberating.
I want to go back to that notion of your vision of a century without some of these folks. Are you sort of positing here that if we apply these ways of thinking, this non-relational structures of application, what would that century look like? Help me understand that. Paint me a picture in our understanding of language as to like what would 100 years look like if we didn't have egomaniacs running around, with Snapchat filters.
Yeah, I think we have no. Here's the unique opportunity for us, Pete. I think for our generation, the generations that are around right now, right? We have lots of examples of people being able to live in truly communal, tribal ways that are exceedingly healthy at small scale. 100 people ish seems to be max. There's a wonderful new book out right now actually called Tribes. This gentleman tracks the kind of life in tribal societies versus life in industrial and agrarian societies, and makes them really interesting. There's one wonderful little just anecdote that has stuck with me in the week since I've heard it. He said, we have, this is from him, he said, we have countless records of early pioneers, settlers, leaving settlements to go join Native American tribes, if they'll have them, and go live that lifestyle. There isn't a single recorded example of somebody from a tribe abandoning their tribe to come live in a settlement unless they were forced to. I think it says something about what human beings actually crave. Right? Community. Connection. Right? Yeah. So here's the opportunity we have for our generation. Now we're doing a crappy job of operationalizing it, but we have for the first time. Oh, no, about what I'm about to say. I'm sorry.
Sure.
We have right now the complete and total ability to feed, clothe, and house every human being on the planet and every human being that'll be born for the next century. We're not doing a good job of it, but we know how to do it. We have the means to do it. We have the resources to do it. Right? We're the first cohort of human beings. We're the first cohort of any species on any that's ever existed that can say that. Now we're not doing it, but the point is we have the means to do that. Right? The opportunity for us is to let go of this, ego-driven this thing, to take care of that baseline, need for everybody.
Right.
And start experiments on how do you live tribally at scale. It is what people are craving. I run these communities. I run this Tuesday Tea community for 20 years. Young people. We've got 150 members. They keep coming. People from China phone into the monthly meetings because they're so connected to this community. We run adult communities, and there's nothing special. We don't have guest speakers. We don't have. It is just community.
So why? So certainly there's a lot going on in China, right? So why would someone who is living in China take time out of their overstimulated day, right? Because they have one of the most overstimulated media systems everywhere. Yeah. Why would they take time out of their day to dial in to East Coast time?
Because they're part of the community.
But what elements make up community?
It is a kind of relationship we have with each other where the space between us is not transactional, where I can just exist. Right. And whatever shows up for me, there's a space for it.
So do we need to defy Maslow's system?
Maslow already, before he died, came up with something above the
above the triangle,
which is self-transcendence. Self-actualization is what everybody thinks is the tip of the triangle, but before he died, he said there's one more: self-transcendence.
So why don't we talk about that? Why is that sort of
There's no money in it.
Okay.
The short answer, right? Who makes money off of that conversation? No, I'm going to get cynical now, but
yeah, no, that's great.
And what we miss though is nobody needs to make money off of it.
So
we have enough.
Right, but I want to come back to that, right?
We are a collective I'm sorry, but
No, it's great.
we are Paris Hiltons and Kardashians of the species as a species.
Yes.
We have enough, and we have no idea what to do with ourselves,
Right.
other than inconsequential things.
So wouldn't you then argue, based on that premise, if it's all about making money, and now that we're not going to go into the capitalist discussion,
Yeah,
because that could go really interesting, but really crazy. But so these education systems right now are designed to create a reliable, predictable outcome. That's the number 8 stamp of approval, right?
Another piece of the machine, yeah.
Right now, why change? Why change? I mean, why do they need to change, rather? I mean, obviously,
Great question.
we're seeing admissions rates dropping, lots of things. I mean, there's a number of fundamental factors that if I put on my economist hat versus my marketing hat, I'm going to have very different answers. But from your perspective, it sounds like I would argue against your original point, which is it sounds like the system is broken because it's designed under a antiquated design manual.
So the design, but why change? There are two answers: an aspirational answer and a practical one. The aspirational one I've already given, because we can. We're the first group of human beings that can actually focus on the development of a human being around self-awareness, living in community, service, etc. Right? We actually can. We can afford to do that. Put aspirational aside and get practical.
Sure.
The practical answer: conservative estimates, 40 to 50% of jobs are going to disappear in 20 years to robotics and AI. Everything controllable, predictable, repeatable, i.e., everything you can teach in a traditional classroom, a machine will do better in less than a generation. What are we going to do with 200 million people? Well, 10% unemployment, we freak out. What are we going to do with 45% unemployment?
Right. Yeah.
You know?
Absolutely.
We need to change the narrative on what it means to be a human being. I think it's that foundational. We teach it in schools, and what we teach in schools of what it means to be a human being is to be an effective resource.
Absolutely.
That's the bottom line. Listen, we call it that in the workplace. They're not human beings, they're human resources.
Right.
And from day one of kindergarten, you're taught this is how you're an effective resource. How you're an effective resource is that you comply with X, you generate behavior Y, you say things A, B, and C. Right? It's trained from day one.
So talk to me. That's amazing, and this has been a really awesome conversation. So I want to talk about that triad of science, craft, and art again for a moment, and I want to talk about it in the construct of building effective teams. So without someone coming in and going through your 2-year or greater program that you have next, how might we, as sort of provocateurs, how might we come in and help to identify a broken team? And obviously change is hard, change takes time, change is inevitable, we can go on and on for that. But what do you believe is the critical path to taking a dysfunctional or a non-functioning team and helping them become an effective team? If you had to sort of sum that up,
I think that yeah, absolutely. I think the single most important first move, as it were, and sometimes is the only one required, though we'll charge for the whole thing because is opening up a space where folks can speak to one simple question: what's so for you? What's so for you? What's so for you in this company? What's so for you in this team? What's so for you in your career?
SO.
Right. What's so for you? It is shocking how little access people have to just speaking their reality in a way that's actually heard without trying to get fixed, challenged, refuted, agreed to.
It's psychological safety. I mean, obviously, Brene Brown talks a lot about that in her work around vulnerability. And
I would say it's ontological safety. So it includes psychological safety or it's ontological safety. It's this state of being that I'm experiencing is not about right or wrong.
So, okay, so now
the state of being.
So going on that premise now, right? So let's say that we can get to understanding that question. How do we then? What are the conditions of entry for that to occur? So if as a leader, as a CEO, what can he or she do today
Yeah.
to create those conditions for their teams?
So listen, all this stuff, just like going back to the family example or the community example, the church example, the the moves don't matter if you don't embody what you're asking for. So if you're looking for, Brene, I love Brene's work. If you, and the reason I love her work is she's not an abstracted thinker. She went through the experience of vulnerability. She
Right.
researched it. Great, she did the science,
Right.
but she had the experience of it. And
Right.
so when she speaks from an embodied place
Right.
of vulnerability, not an abstract understanding. So if you're a leader of a system, a manager of a system, um, talking about what's so, talking about vulnerability, talking about teamwork is nonsense if you're not embodying.
Interesting.
If I'm not willing to say what's so for me, how can I expect the team to do so?
Right.
What's so for me is I'm frustrated that I don't know how to help you guys, and that the work's got to move forward, and I don't know how to manage this. I get paid to manage this. I don't know how to manage you guys. As a simplistic example,
Of course.
if I'm not willing to speak my truth
Right.
courageously and accountably, right? And so when I say that what's slow, I have to take accountability for you're not making me feel that way. That's how I feel.
Right.
Right.
That makes sense. So what I'm hearing in that construct, back to your, science, art, and craft, is science and craft can the science and craft can be applied.
Mm-hmm.
What I'm hearing from you though is, are you born with art? Can you be taught or learned or experienced art?
You have done like a half a dozen times throughout this conversation these little dismissals about not being smart or whatnot, like just kind of joking about yourself.
There's
not
a
being
psychological term for it. It's called imposter syndrome.
yeah. And seriously,
I'm
you
working
got
through
you
that.
got to stop, because here's why. If the degree to which you dismiss it, and so that question you asked is insanely insightful, and I'm going to respond to it, but I want to get to the meta. The degree to which you dismiss it is the degree to which you cause others to not step forward and be accountable for their brilliance. See, if you get arrogant about it, that's no good. But if you dismiss it, you shut down invitation for others to express their brilliance.
Right.
So stop taking it from other people. It's not about you.
Positively or negatively charged.
Yeah.
Right.
Make it neutrally charged.
Right.
This is what I see. If it's brilliant, I don't care. If it's dumb, I don't care. This is what I see.
Awesome.
Right? Okay, back to your question, because the art thing gets to that. In the leadership program, we were premised that fundamentally, we can't teach you how to be a leader. Leadership cannot be taught, but it can be learned.
It can be learned.
Yeah, but it can't be taught. Think about it.
Right.
Leadership's an art form.
Right.
I can't teach Picasso how to be Picasso. I can create the conditions in which Picasso can paint his first masterpiece.
Right.
And it's rigorous, right?
Right.
But I can't teach it. So, absolutely, you're born with it. Every human being's born with it. Almost no human being in modern society, the way we've constructed it, has a space in which it's invited, let alone cultivated, and
right.
accepted, right?
So, what would you say? So we get a lot of companies we work with have very smart people from inspected by number 7, 8, 9, 10, MBAs, PhDs, the whole nine.
Yeah.
And I'm seeing and hearing different words, different language, but I'm hearing this notion of a lack of art in one's expression, a lack of critical thinking, a lack of applied thinking. And the word thinking keeps coming up, whether it's critical thinking, applied, whatever the framework is of du jour.
Sure.
My question for you is, what can we tell our audience here that they can start doing? So you've given us this idea of how do we establish some baseline parameters for teaming, and I think it starts with the leader being vulnerable and being able to put themselves out there and acknowledge their brilliance or lack thereof in a very transparent, open way, right? That authenticity that we all crave without the buzzword. Talk to me about what they can do, what we can do as leaders to create the conditions where that art can then happen when so much of their educational, just education in general, just being alive, right, has been stripped away.
Sure.
Because I talk to people all the time, Al, and people tell me all the time, I'm not creative.
Yeah.
I'm not creative. I'm not an artist. I'm not an
Yeah.
artist. I hear that all the time.
Yeah.
So I want you to help us to defy and define that if you could.
Yeah, I have a practice for you, and I'll tell you a story about my daughter that kind of one I tell a lot that kind of captures the practice, and now I'll tell you what the practice is. Okay, so ever since she's been, we have one child. She's 19 now, sophomore in college. But ever since she was little, she and I share the same kind of weird sense of humor, right?
Okay.
Like, at the age of 3, we were watching Monty Python together, like, just. And so,
Sounds like a cool kid.
she is. I experience her that way at least. So we play pranks on each other. So there's one, kind of famous one in the family. She's 5 years old. In the afternoon, she gets like a snack, a drink, goes downstairs to watch TV. This is like a thing. Like you watch Caillou, Sesame Street, whatever it was at the time. And so what I'd done at this particular day is we had like these Oreos, right? And you pop the Oreos in half. You get an X-Acto blade. You cut out the center of the cream. You pull it out, so there's a ring of cream left.
Don't give your 5-year-olds X-Acto blades, though. By the way.
Yeah, no. And then you fill that space with like mustard, mayonnaise, hot sauce, toothpaste, whatever you'd like. Put the cap back on. So from the outside, it looks like a regular Oreo. You do that for a dozen Oreos in the front of the package. You leave it and you wait. And so this one day, gets her a snack, and I get her a juice, and she goes downstairs, and I just sit in the kitchen and I wait. And sure enough, like 5 minutes later, I hear, "Daddy!" Comes running up the stairs. First thing she says to me, "Can I do this to mommy?" Not upset, but she goes, so around this stage in her life, so that's a setup to the practice, to the story, to the real meat of the story. Around this stage in her life, I noticed myself saying something consistently. I say, "Sarah, you're so funny." I say to other people, "Pete, you can't imagine this kid, how funny she is. She's hilarious. She put vinegar in her mother's water bottle. It was like, she's so funny." She did that. "She's so funny." I keep a notebook that's got 3 sections to it. One is for notes. The other 2 are for a practice. First one is things I realize I know too well, particularly about other people.
Things I know too well about other people.
Yeah.
Okay.
And so I caught myself. I know this about her. I write it down so I can let it go. Because what happens? Now, this is a heightened example. Only child, like classic daddy's little girl, 5 years old. And I am saying, "You're so funny, you're so funny." I may as well be Moses down from the mountain with a tablet that says, "Thou shalt be funny."
Yeah. Right.
And so I find with people that I'm committed to in a relationship, work, employees, co-workers, friends, that I'm very cautious about what I know too much about them, what I know too certainly about them.
Right.
And I capture it, and have a practice of let it go.
So essentially what I'm hearing is you're removing bias by being in the present moment. Essentially it's a mindfulness without the woo-woo.
Back to the question you asked, the practice for the manager?
Yes.
Is to be aware of what you know about your people and let it go. Now, situationally, right? There are aspects that are management that are about control and predictability.
Yes.
And if I need a project done that needs a predictable, reliable outcome, I want to know who's got the skill set, who's got the inspector by number 8 to get to that outcome. And I'm going to acknowledge I'm using you as a resource for this task. But the broader relationship has to be informed by letting go of what I know about you so you can be whoever it is you feel to be in the moment. That's the basis of art. That's the basis of innovation.
Right.
Is your freedom to express.
Right.
And so I shift that with my daughter at the age of 5 from "you're funny, she's funny, she's funny, you're funny," to acknowledging the same thing. "Hey, when you put vinegar in your mother's water bottle, that made me laugh. Like that was the funniest thing I've seen all week."
Right.
Nothing about her.
Right.
That's my experience.
Right, because essentially, if she grew up, and I'm not a parent, so I can theorize on this, but if she grew up thinking that she was funny, and then she had let's just call it a traumatic experience where she had a significant other, whatever, and that significant other told her she was not funny, and then all of a sudden now
now she's broken.
Now she's broken because of one person's assessment.
Sure, right? Yeah. Now she's broken. Now I'm wrong. Now there's something wrong.
So I think what we're not that we're prescribing anything here, but I think if we were to prescribe things, I think as it pertains to just going really big again, back to education, back to building teams, back to just the conditions of entry that ultimately will lead to a better world, more innovation.
Mhm.
Really, what it comes down to is sort of unlabeling the unlabeling of these machines and these systems as we understand them to create the space for people to pick up the guitar backwards.
Listen, nature is an improviser.
Right.
Nature plays jazz. It doesn't,
Nature plays jazz.
that's what it does. We have this thing about plastic and listen, for us plastic is a problem, but I promise you in 10,000 years plastic will be just a part of nature. It'll find a way to. There'll be species that pop up that live off of plastic.
Right.
Nature is constantly playing jazz. It's constantly creating. It's constantly improvising. There's nothing that's wrong in the context of nature.
Awesome.
Right?
Well, Al, before I let you go, anything we didn't talk about today when it comes to the future of education that you think that someone's going to watch this and hope we covered? Just that if there was one last thing that we didn't talk about before I get you back to your ever busy schedule.
Listen, there's this conversation, like every conversation worth having. There's always more, right? So I'm not sure if there's anything I'm sure there's plenty of things we haven't covered. The only thing I'd say, by way of closing, other than to thank you again for the
thank you for
opportunity for the conversation. The other thing I would say is just this for us, everything starts with you, right? And so with your manager, your teacher, the education conversation, self-education is the most important thing. So that no practice, know too much, do it with yourself first. What do I know about myself too much?
Right.
All these things that are about playing jazz, improvising, you first.
You've given us a lot to think about, Alan. I guess the last question before I say thank you is, where can we read more about or learn more about you and what you're up to with U of Next?
Sure. Two sites, uofnext.com, letter U of next.com, and then botstudios.com is the umbrella for a bunch of other, it's an umbrella for all the content.
Awesome. We'll leave that in the description field
Great.
for everybody to check out. Thanks for tuning in to episode 1 of hopefully many more. Thanks to Al of Forward Obsessed. Take care.